Thank you for listening to this Podcast One production. Now available on Apple Podcasts, Podcast One, Spotify, and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
Welcome to Killer Gene's Stripped Down, where we talk about everything true crime and then some.
You'll hear about the cases that are close to us and go behind the scenes of true crime reporting.
We'll also talk about case updates and breaking news, as well as speak with some of our friends and colleagues in the world of true crime.
Now, we're going to be sharing things we've never been able to talk about because certainly inappropriate to post online, but this is the platform that we can finally share it, what really happens when gathering true crime stories.
So, let's get to it. We are joined by Kevin Balfe, the executive producer of the live true crime event, CrimeCon. Kevin, welcome.
Hey guys, nice to meet you.
It's so funny. I have so many questions being a crime reporter of 20 years, but I'm so fascinated to learn before we start just your take on the phenomena around true crime.
It's a big question. Yeah, to me, it doesn't feel new. I feel like true crime has been with us in various forms for certainly as long as I've been alive. I always tell people sort of like the delivery mechanisms have changed quite a bit. And I think the type of content people are interested in has changed. But I grew up on Cops. I grew up on The People's Court, Dateline, obviously still around. But I think the things that make true crime great in terms of storytelling are the things that make all stories well told, interesting to people, which is good guys, bad guys, mysteries, climactic events. And so, to me, the story of true crime is just, part of kind of human nature and has always been around. And hopefully, the crime part, I would love for it to not be around. But I think in terms of why people react to it the way they do, I think that it's just about the new delivery, especially with like podcasts, for example, that we're on right now. Right. It's just different ways of engaging with stories that have stood the test of time.
What were some of your favorite crime stories? I mean, if you can even use that word, but those cases and stories that really stuck with you? Well,
I grew up in Cheshire, Connecticut, which ultimately became home. It's incredible to say it about your own hometown, which is a really small, idyllic sort of suburban Connecticut town, but became home to one of the worst crimes, really, I think, in U.S. history, which was the home invasion of Dr. William Pettit's family, where they killed the two girls and the mother. And he, you guys know the story, I'm sure. He survived. They did HBO did a documentary on it and called The Cheshire Killings, I believe. And so for me, that one just always hit home because obviously growing up there, I just knew all of the places and everything. The bank that they went to with the mom beforehand was my bank and all those sorts of things. So of any case, really, that's the one that hit home. I had left town by that point, so it didn't, it wasn't anything that hit me personally. But I told my mom growing up, we got to lock our back door. And she would say, why do we have to lock our back door? We live in Cheshire, And so things like that really hit home. I just remember like there's some odd just breakthrough cases. Like, I don't even know if I could tell you the names of the people in them, but I always remember there was like a Dateline episode of a guy who got married and took on their honeymoon. He went to Australia and his wife was killed scuba diving or died scuba diving. He was from Georgia, I believe. And,
I totally remember that one.
You know that case? Yeah. And I think like as I think about, and so that one was just such a mystery around, did he do something to cause the scuba gear to fail? Right. And there was all these, obviously, all these pieces of evidence, in favor and opposed, and eyewitnesses who were there who said he did things and was acting oddly, and other people who said he didn't. And then, Kelly, as you know, since you and I have worked together on some things, like the Ray Griecar case out of Pennsylvania was one that to me always stuck with me. He was the former DA, or he was the DA who went missing. And in that particular case, there's still not an answer. And to me, what's fascinating there is you're looking at either someone who purposely has gone missing, someone who is murdered and the body hidden, or a suicide. Or in this case, actually a fourth option, which is that he's in the witness protection program. So I guess what those kind of have in common, and the cases that stick out to me have in common, are the kind of more complicated, no easy answer sort of cases. Like I'm less interested in the stuff we cover certainly quite a bit at CrimeCon, but the serial killer cases or the psychology of killing. have less of that interest than I do of just the mysteries overall and trying to find out where there'll ever be answers to some of these cases.
So it sounds like you lean towards unsolved. Is that right? Just something that's still out there and needs, that one thing to solve?
I think so, although it's also really annoying, right? It's like, who wants to, we want answers, of course. And the unsolved piece of it is frustrating. But yeah, I think when you put it that way, yeah, I think so. I like the idea that there's still work to be done. And I think with CrimeCon, that's one of my reasons for starting it and for getting into a lot of the things we've gotten into with it, which is trying to not just cover cases that have been adjudicated or where there's answers, but what can we learn and how can we help? How can this community help? And those unsolved cases, the cold cases, the families that we constantly meet time and time again who need answers, who need support, like that's the stuff where I feel like, to me, is not only interesting, but that there's actually still good that can come out of it.
Well, I have to say, I would hope that 99% of the people listening right now are aware of CrimeCon and have attended either an event live or virtually. And the platform is brilliant. Just like you said, it's not only covering the adjudicated cases or whatever serial killer, but it's giving a platform that's a little bit more intimate to those cases that need attention and need answers. Was that the biggest motivation for you to start this? And like I always tell people, it's like the Comic-Con, but for crime. Is that kind of how you modeled it after? And have you seen, and again, to branch out the question even more, is it's grown so much over the last couple of years. So why don't you tell us about that growth?
Well, yeah, it has. I mean, to be honest with you, when we started it, I didn't really know anything about anything in terms of true crime as I hate to say business, but the fact is from a standpoint of there's cable networks, there's documentaries, there's podcasts that take advertising, there's merchandise. I mean, it is a business. And I think that people who are involved in it in any way, shape or form shouldn't necessarily shy away from that. It doesn't negate the fact that there's a lot of good things that can happen within it. There's a lot of businesses that do very good things. So I guess that's number one. But I didn't know much about the business of true crime or the business of live events. So when you put those things together, it's a real bad combination. Someone that knows really nothing about anything. We really struggled the first year to put an event together that we would be proud of. And we didn't know if anybody would come, to be honest. I think the story I always tell is that the way this came about was that we had started a new startup, me and a couple partners, and we were really looking at personalities, and we still do. We look at personalities who have strong opinions in all different aspects of life, who have a direct connection with their own audience, and we think we can help build something special for. And as part of that, we were taking a look at Nancy Grace, right? She was circling off of headline news at the time, wanted to do something that was a little bit more direct to fans that she had accumulated over the years. And so I was sort of heading that up and starting to learn about the demographics of the true crime audience, who was fans of her, who were the advertisers. And I thought, whatever we build, we should market at whatever the premier true crime event is. We should be the title sponsor of that. And I quickly realized that did not exist. And that kind of created the opportunity for starting to think about what this could be. Why didn't that exist? First of all, had people looked at it and decided it was a terrible idea? And then, once we started kind of getting into the development of it, well, what could this be? And at that point in time, you really can go in a lot of directions. I was someone who was listening at that point to kind of the new, I don't know what history will ultimately call it, but right now I'm calling it kind of the new age of true crime, which was really serial from the podcast perspective, and the Jinx and Making a Murder from documentaries. You got Making a Murder is on Netflix and the Jinx on HBO. So these are two sort of premium prestige networks that all of a sudden have found that true crime has a big audience. And it kind of just the thought occurred to me, if they are attracting an audience with this new type of storytelling, which to me went much deeper into the character development, much deeper into some of the bigger questions in Making a Murder, the Brendan Dassey interrogation, the question of innocence, the question of wrongful convictions. If more dollars are going to be given to content like that, it's going to attract a new type of fan. Or even if it's not a new type of fan, the old true crime diehards who like recreations and those sorts of things, I think are going to discover that true crime is a lot wider than that. And to me, that's what made sense for CrimeCon, rather than go in the direction of sensationalism and tabloidism and kind of the old, I'll call it the 80s or 90s version of true crime. I'm much more interested in the education side, the advocacy side, these weird, complicated questions that cannot be simply answered by here's the killer. And that's what I wanted CrimeCon to be. And so we've spent 4+ years now really developing that audience that that also agrees that that's where they're interested in. And Kelly, as someone who's been to a few of these, I think you can probably attest that is who comes out. These are folks who are wildly curious, highly educated, are willing to sit in sessions about very random and obscure topics, sometimes very nerdy and deep dive on a case, sometimes about, DNA and forensics and science related things. But it's not a place where you're going to go and in any way feel like you are celebrating true crime or it's a very supportive and welcoming environment, and we're really proud of that.
It's a very respectful environment from the attendees, especially, that they're all there for the same purpose, which is to find answers and to learn. It's not there to sensationalize.
Well, not only that, but what's interesting, and I don't know if this had to do with spreading the word and letting people know about CrimeCon, but what we're seeing emerge, especially in documentaries like Don't Fuck with Cats, are sleuths that are, people to reckon with because they are solving crimes. So you have everyday people that are so entrenched in just emotionally tied and connected to certain cases that they will take their free time to actually try and help solve and become private investigators. Was that a world that you knew about before, or is that something that CrimeCon helped draw in?
It's not a world I knew about before. I don't really know the answer to the second part. I would really like that to be the case, and I hope if it hasn't happened yet that it will happen. I do know that we've motivated a lot of people in various different ways. They'll come and they'll see, for example, podcasters who've come and seen what other people are doing in the podcast space and thought, I have something to say, or I have a case that I'm passionate about, and so I want to start my own podcast. Certainly a lot of connections have been made from the content creation angle between producers and cases and law enforcement and those sorts of things. But I'm not sure, from a standpoint of have people come and realized, hey, I can be a sort of a citizen detective on my own. I hope that if it's happened, and Kelly knows this, one of my big things on it is that people do it responsibly and do it in the right way. I remember, going back to the Boston Marathon bombing and sort of that being the first exposure a lot of people had to this idea that there were all these people out there on Reddit who had all these capabilities of zooming in on photographs and face matching of things and all this stuff, and are irresponsibly up there naming all these suspects, in real time. And that gave this idea of CrowdSolving or of citizen detectives or armchair detectives or whatever you want to call them, I thought a really bad name to start. And I've always felt that that's, unfair. And that a lot of what we've done both in CrimeCon and some of our offshoots events like CrowdSolve, where we have taken a distinct cold case and put it in front of regular people, we've always done in the right way and tried to, part of our mission on that is to not only certainly provide actual answers if we can for law enforcement, but also to train the people themselves that there is a way any of us can help law enforcement. We all have unique backgrounds, experiences, skill sets. We all know different people who can contribute. All those things are really important. It's just that law enforcement, I think up until now, and including now in some cases, has been really reticent to use that because they understand the downsides. They understand that people like those folks on Reddit that day can get a little ahead of themselves. And so, there's got to be this middle ground, though, where you can leverage the collective brain power of this country and of the amazing experts that we have out there to help in a lot of these cases. People want to help, and a lot of times they just don't know how. And the other thing I think we stress on that front is that it's not just about doing it right in the investigation part. It doesn't matter if you then can't actually charge this person and go through with a prosecution. And so that's the other thing that we keep saying over and over again to the folks who participate in these sorts of sessions that we do or these sorts of events, is that it only matters if we have a prosecution, a successful prosecution ideally. And so the things that you're doing that help the police, or things that you're not doing, i.e. don't go to the crime scene, right? These things that make some sense and are in some ways common sense. I think once people understand the why, they really begin to align and do better work when you can focus them in on here's what will help the police, right? It's means, motive, and opportunity, or it's reviewing a specific case file and looking at certain connections from back then, or it's leveraging your use of social media to help discover something that Billy Jensen does really well in his world, right? Use social media and digital tools to go back in time in some cases and make connections where the police are struggling. So there's a lot that can be done, and I certainly hope that we have influenced or motivated people to get into that. But I haven't heard those stories myself yet.
Well, and that's how CrowdSolve was birthed. is using that platform and the power of the crowd to harness everybody's different expertise. And you guys had great success with CrowdSolve Seattle and CrowdSolve Chicago on those 3 cases that were profiled in those two cities.
I think it's for people who don't know, CrowdSolve is a single case event. So CrimeCon is sort of the buffet. That's the way I describe it. You go to a buffet dinner, there's a little bit of steak, there's a little bit of fish, there's some potatoes, right? You could get a little of a lot of things at CrimeCon. And my mission in programming it is always, if you're someone who's into cold cases, for example, you can weave your way through the weekend really focusing on cold cases. And if you're someone that loves the psychology side of it, you can the same thing there. The forensic side, same thing there. But it's fairly surface level on that kind of stuff. Whereas CrowdSolve is really like the single entree dinner where we're taking one case and for 3 days doing nothing but that case. We've got law enforcement there, the families there, and then depending on what the key aspects of that case are, we brought in our own experts to then help educate the audience on those things prior to them engaging with it. So before you can really engage on, taking a look at witness interrogation statements, for example, you need a little prep in terms of from our friend Mark McClish, who's a former U.S. Marshal whose specialty is really in deception detection, statement analysis. What words do people use to give themselves away when they're lying? These sorts of things. So we give you education and then we ask for your help. And we do that in a whole bunch of different areas that are pertinent to each case. And then what we try to do is leverage the power of the crowd and in terms of trends and ideas that a majority of the crowd sort of believes in to then say back to law enforcement, hey, we're not giving you the killer in an envelope, right? This isn't a made for TV movie, but here's 3, 4, 5 things that we think would be really helpful for you to do again. It may be as simple as going back to a witness that you've already interviewed, but now asking them this question, or going to a witness whose answer changed over the years and going back and re-asking a question. So, there is certainly testing components and, hey, have you thought about looking for DNA on this particular thing? Or in one of the cases that we did, we said there happened to be a sort of an area where somebody kept leaving gifts at the scene where the body was found. We said, have you thought about putting up security cameras or hidden cameras to monitor the scene? Who's leaving these guests? Let's just find out that answer. So these are not like, I know we call it CrowdSolve, but the solve is really like, what are some practical, real, functional things that law enforcement can do to try to get this case going again? And I think you're right, Kelly. I think we have been successful in all 3 cases that we've worked on under that banner. In nothing else, if reigniting the passion for the case among the cold case units themselves, which they're human, just like all of us. A case goes cold for 10 or 15 years. It sort of ends up at a file at the bottom of a cabinet, or in this case, in a shoebox in a basement. And so I think even if you start bringing a case out, getting it media attention, getting the community re-engaged with it, getting the media re-engaged with it, that's a lot. That's a lot. And that's definitely something that we can do and we plan to do a lot more of.
Well, it's always important to put a spotlight on a cold case. And do you choose cases within the city that you are hosting the event?
For the CrowdSolve one, we have tried to stick to the geographic area, not necessarily the city, but the sort of, let's say the region, mostly because to me, it's important that local media participates in this. And I think the local media has a huge role to play in getting a case reignited. And in one of the cases that we covered, what ended up happening was between us and a podcast that had also been following this case, we had announced that our event was coming and the podcast had been following the story. Somebody calls, this is after, I think, 10, 12 years, somebody calls 911 and confesses. Now, there's a whole bunch of stuff that happened after that confession in terms of whether that was real or fake or whatever, that's still being worked through. However, again, from a standpoint of ruffling branches and seeing what falls out, you need the community to care again. And Payne Lindsay did this really well with the Tara Grinstead case, right? Like, he didn't solve, despite all the work he did on that and despite the millions of people listening to Up and Vanished, the reality was that the podcast, quote unquote, didn't solve the case, but the podcast created the circumstances, I firmly believe, whereby the relationships between the players in the case had changed enough where someone was ready to talk. Someone was ready to give in, say something that they hadn't said before. And I think that is definitely a repeatable system that can be applied to a lot of cold cases. In some of the ones that we covered, as the police said to us, the conversations that happen after someone dies, there's a lot of things being protected, people being protected, relationships being protected. But you add 12 years to it, divorces have happened, deaths have happened, people have moved out of state, people don't have the jobs they used to have. life keeps going, and it's important to revisit a cold case that has a solvability factor to it, because those new relationships, those new marriages, those new jobs could mean that someone's finally willing to say something that they weren't before. And to me, while that might be unsexy to Hollywood in terms of how something gets solved, that's the reality of how these cases that get solved. Someone knows something, someone says something. And I do think for all of us in the content community around this, whether you have a podcast or an event like us, that's one of our missions, is get people talking, get people thinking, get people focused on something that they weren't focused on before. And, hopefully something good comes out of it.
And when it comes to CrowdSolve, and this is kind of a twofer, do the people attending get to submit their thoughts and their questions or their approaches to the actual detectives of the case they're examining? And in regards to that, you've pulled in a massive attraction to even celebrities. I mean, Selena Gomez showed up to one of these with her mom. Are those both not only the attraction of celebrities, but also are their thoughts and voices delivered to the actual investigators?
Yeah. So on the first question, yes, it happens two ways. So one, there's individual sort of reports that each person fills out with their own thoughts on the case. It's really more specific questions on the case. It's not like, hey, what do you think happened? It's very specific questions around particular suspects and persons of interest and those sorts of things. And then there's also the sort of overall case report that is more the crowd's side that I was alluding to earlier. So we'll then take specific data points. So we'll ask people to rank certain suspects, 0 to 10 on probability that they know more than they've said in their transcripts, or that they, possibly that they even had direct involvement in the case. And we'll deliver those data points to the police, along with some call outs from some of the individual reports that we thought were particularly worth following up. So we try to give them the kind of the macro and the micro. As far as celebrities, I mean, Selena really came as with her mom. Her mom's a big true crime buff, and I think they just came for a girls' weekend, and it had nothing to do with anything that she's working on content-wise or anything like that. But I thought for us and for the future of these, anytime celebrities are willing to lend their voice to a platform, it's generally helpful. I can't say every time, but most times it's helpful. And I think most families of cold case victims, most families of victims in general, especially when the case is cold, would love the support and the help of a celebrity to sort of get the word out, to amplify the story. So I thought for us, for the immediate side that Selena's presence there then ultimately received, that was only, I think, helpful for just, again, more eyes on that case, more people becoming aware of that case, more excitement among the community and the police department there itself, which was a really small department in Ohio, for the case. So, whether there's a lot of people that judge Kim Kardashian for the cases she's been involved with and these sorts of things, and getting like, who are you to come over? But the reality is, if you shine light on something and society or the community deems that that's a positive thing and change comes as a result, I don't feel like who are we to judge, what your motivations were or anything else.
Oh, Kevin, I've done many stories on Kim and her team and her legal advisors, what they have done, especially for those wrongly convicted. It is remarkable. I don't think people understand the scope of, even from, putting the spotlight to paying legal fees silently, a huge impact, especially for the wrongfully convicted or the over sentencing of people. No, it truly is, more than people realize the impact that they make.
Exactly. I mean, I think it's like anything in life. It's very easy for people on the outside to just judge and to assign motivations and motives to anything that anyone else does, right? It's the entire premise of of tabloid magazines and these sorts of things. But I like you, I know some of those stories from that are not necessarily out there, and so I certainly. But even if I didn't know those stories and I didn't necessarily believe it, I still think, to answer the overall question, listen, if The Rock, or I don't know who's the A-list celebrity of the day, I'm too old for this stuff. Timothy Charlemagne, is that somebody? I don't know how you say his name. He wants to get involved in true crime and help the Delphi family raise awareness and get this guy caught. Like, absolutely, 1,000%, bring it on.
Well, and Kevin, you have expanded the CrimeCon menu even further by launching CrimeHQ. For the people that aren't aware of what that is, why don't you give them the explanation?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, CrimeHQ is just sort of our attempt to say the true crime community right now is really splintered when it comes to online stuff. You have got people on Reddit, you've got people on Twitter, you've got people on various Facebook groups, YouTube channels, all over the place. And no one's trying to take that away. But the feeling is like, from what we've seen at CrimeCon and CrowdSolve, this community of people really is very special. And when they meet each other in person, they sort of immediately, it dawns on both of them that we have this thing in common that we don't have to explain ourselves to other people about, right? I don't have to go through and explain to my cousin at Thanksgiving why I enjoy listening to true crime podcasts. Like, we already get it. And so I felt like when you've got that type of community that has coalesced around a passion, whether it's your passion for a specific band or your passion for cooking, or in this case, your passion for true crime, that it just makes sense to try to bring that community together, not just in real life, but also, digitally throughout the year. So CrimeHQ is really our attempt to create a true crime community that really does focus on certainly news and those sorts of things, but on that education piece. We do a lot of live events. Kelly, you're involved in a couple of these where we'll bring in just interesting newsmakers, not newsmakers, in some cases newsmakers, but just interesting people from the world of crime. And that could be anything from, they have a job where they're a prison warden, or they run a canine unit, or they're a body language expert, or whatever the case may be, and just talk to them. What did you do? How do you get into it? Answer questions from the audience. So that's one side of it. And then there's other events we do. We do sort of a mini CrowdSolve in there. We just did the Dior Coons Jr. case out of Idaho, where we bring in this case, a local reporter. And just like we did in CrowdSolve in person, we surround them with experts. We program live events almost every week or every other week where this reporter can tell this story to an audience that really doesn't know it that well, provide great real-time information, and in a lot of cases ask for help. If not ask for help, at least answer a lot of questions. The sheriff was involved in an interview for our series for that case. And so it's trying to bring a little bit of the CrimeCon world online. And I think it's also, my kind of analogy for it is like, CrimeHQ is the place where everybody every day can gather. And then CrimeCon is kind of the family reunion, right? So you're going to kind of all meet each other throughout the year in this online forum. And then at CrimeCon, we actually get to meet each other in real life, spend sessions together, go to dinner together, those kinds of things. So that's the vision for it. Very young. I think we're 3 or 4 months old on CrimeHQ right now. So certainly still finding our sea legs. But the community in there itself is awesome. And the people are just like we see at CrimeCon, super engaged and passionate and supportive. It's not like a Reddit board where if you offer a theory on a case, you're going to get yelled at and you're an idiot and all these. There's no it's a very positive community. And so I think that's also the vision for it, is like, it's a safe place for what I consider to be the type of fans that we want at CrimeCon all the time, which are these super passionate, engaged, and educated people who aren't interested in the sensationalistic side of true crime, but rather the educational side of it.
Well, and you under the CrimeCon umbrella have also given back quite substantially. I want you to tell us about what happened in Austin at the recent CrimeCon gathering with the Cleveland Missing and Gina DeJesus.
Well, I wouldn't say we're at the Kim Kardashian level here, but it has been part of our mission that behind the scenes, in some cases in front of the scenes, but in a lot of cases behind the scenes, we are also giving back in places where we think we can be helpful. Gina DeJesus is, as you guys probably already know, was the survivor of Castro. She was in the basement for, 10 years, 8 years, a long time, 11 years. And so, long story short, when we had met her through the chief of police in Newburgh Heights, Ohio, who happened to also be the chief of police who was working with us on one of our CrowdSolve cases. So these are, it's just a fascinating thing, because as you develop these relationships and meet more and more people, they're connected to other people, and you just find interesting topics, people, and ways to help. And so in this case, the chief said, would you guys be interested in having Gina at one of your events? And of course, we said we'd love to talk to her. And I think as time went on, it became clear that Gina herself was pretty reticent. Obviously, not only had she been through a lot, but I think she felt, what's the point of going to like CrimeCon? These people are just going to ask me to describe what my life was like in a basement for 11 years. And, we, through the chief, explained to her that what we really wanted to do was help her new foundation get off the ground. And that requires money, and that requires relationships. And so when you think about behind the scenes at CrimeCon, Austin's a great example of this. Here I've got Beth Holloway, Natalie's mother, who, after Natalie went missing, started a foundation to try to help other families who were going through this. And in her way, the help that she wanted to provide to other families was mostly around dealing with law enforcement and media, because an average person goes from 0 to 100 when it comes to media attention on this thing, and no one's prepared for that. Gina felt very much the same way. So number one, let's get Gina and the chief of police who's on the foundation's board and Natalie's mom, Beth, in a room together, and let's have them just talk, because that's not anything you could ever buy. That is just experience. So those sorts of things, I love those sorts of connections and odd things. But then we just also felt like they need money, they need dollars. And so, yeah, it was a really fun moment. We surprised Gina and her cousin and the chief on stage as they were kind of talking by going out there and basically, announcing that we were going to match donations. Every donation that came in, we would match throughout CrimeCon, which made Gina cry, which was awesome, because I felt like it really, for me, it just was heartwarming, because it really made her, I think, feel that she made the right choice by coming to our event. And, it's something that I take really seriously. I don't ever want the guests, in this case, someone who's a victim, to feel like they wasted their time or this, we did wrong by them or the community wasn't behind them. So I think to see her understand the magnitude of what that money was going to be, and then also understand the relationships that they'd developed to get the foundation off the ground was really meaningful. And then I think, it's both sides, right? From the audience side, they also got to hear an incredible story from Gina, something that many people have not heard in person, and also were able to help themselves by contributing. So that's, like, to me, the perfect CrimeCon session. It's an incredible true crime story, but there's also so much more to do, and it's someone who's trying to use their life experiences to help the next person who has to go through this and deal with media attention and deal with scammers and law enforcement and all this stuff. I think that in this case, hopefully the money that they raised and again, the people that they met will help that foundation really get off the ground.
Kevin, where do you see true crime programming evolving to, and how do you plan to keep up with it? I mean, just for one, just being in television my entire 20 plus year career, I never thought I would be in the podcast game, and it was difficult to even walk into it. I thought, oh, this is weird. I'm a TV correspondent, but the platform is just, it's undeniable, so it keeps evolving and changing. And now the online streamers, where do you see it going? How are you keeping up?
It's a good question. I've tried less to be the sort of prognosticator of it, because I think, to your point about podcasts, 10 years ago, if you had told anyone, true crime or different genre, that you guys would be doing this new thing called podcasts and it's like radio but on demand and all this stuff, people would have laughed at you. So I don't know, platform wise, where we're going to be. It's easy to forget that even the iPhone is new in the history of technology. Social media is new and all of this stuff. So what I always just go back to is that, like we talked about in the very beginning, that true crime, what true crime stories are, when done well, are always going to resonate with people. I've done plenty of media interviews where the reporters are trying to do the gotcha questions around, how could you have an event that celebrates this kind of stuff and whatever. And it's like, once I can get past my just hatred of those questions, I just say to them, there's a great example. I'll just give you a specific example. The New York Post did a story on us after one of our events that it was by this specific woman, and she just ripped the event apart. The whole thing was nonsense about, women are there because they're living out their rape fantasies, all this just absolute nonsense. I could not understand how you could have even gone to this event and come up with this take that this woman had. But basically her entire take was anything to do with monetizing of crime is, you should be ashamed of yourself. And then lo and behold, 9 months later, I get a call from a publicist, and she's representing this reporter, and she wants me to have her at CrimeCon to sell her book, which was a book about a serial killer. And I just could not believe the hypocrisy of someone that could have that opinion in writing and then write a book. But sorry, I'm off track. But to get back to your question, I think that to me, the idea that true crime is going to always be there in terms of the content side, I believe is not going away anytime soon. I think that podcasts and the streaming networks, all of the dollars being thrown into development right by Netflix, et cetera, has created maybe a little bit of a bubble of content that's coming out right now, because there's such a land grab for viewers and listeners that people are just spending to get these things. But regardless, my feeling is that for CrimeCon and the platform that we've created, what we're there to do is cover whatever the relevant issues are for that year. So in some cases, that is cases. In some cases, that's societal issues that are happening in criminal justice, whether that's Black Lives Matter, whether that's wrongful convictions and the work that the Innocence Project has done, whether that's calls for defunding the police. And let's talk about that, in terms of what are the real, like my idea for CrimeCon is to cut through noise and media, right? And when you get there in person and you're in a session, you're listening to real, reasonable, rational people, potentially on both sides of the argument, and you come away learning something and maybe making a better decision. And so to me, whatever way this goes, whether podcasts continue to be the thing in 20 years or whether we're all, engaging in true crime through like VR goggles or something, who knows? But I feel like we're going to continue to cover the stories themselves. But I care about the stories and I care about the topics and I care about the education. And so I think whatever the delivery mechanism is for the content producers is great. But for us, I think we provide an opportunity to get in a room with those people one-on-one, ask your question directly. And then you can't overstate the community aspect of what we build. And Kelly certainly has seen this and knows this, that part of the reason why people come to our events is the feeling of being there and being surrounded by people, again, who get it, who you don't have to say, like, I can just say, do you think Stephen Avery is guilty? And you don't have to go into like, who is Stephen Avery and what is making a murder and what, they already know. So you can just get right to the questions you want. And that's a really refreshing thing for a lot of people. And I feel like, again, no matter what technology in the future has for true crime, we'll still be there to provide that for the community.
I also want to add that covering these stories helps a case go viral, right? And what it needs, a lot of these cases have ignited bills to just ensure the safety within the states of the crimes. And so when you cover cases like this, there are more things than just seeking answers, solving a case, finding justice, whatever justice means to you, but it's also at a higher level of law enforcement or deficiencies within that, creating bills for society's safety. I mean, there are so many benefits of also that other side of true crime that people don't necessarily talk about that's still in play.
Oh, it's a tremendous point, and it's definitely one of my top 3 reasons of when I think about what to program. I mean, this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier, that like people like to think they hear true crime and they go, oh, serial killers. It's like, okay, fine. And I admit that I may be in the minority of this, but my interest is in like exactly what you were just talking about. I mean, we had Laura Richards there talking about stalking laws and coercive control laws, right? And how these laws are so light on the books in most states and even most countries that police are handcuffed. They have nowhere to go a lot of times, even when they've got a case that really needs to be addressed. And so how do you create advocacy among the participants at CrimeCon to go back to their own communities and get actually involved, right? Start petitions, go talk to your representatives and say, hey, did you know that if X, Y, and Z happens, that a woman has no ability to go and get a restraining order renewed, or the police have no ability to go and arrest a guy unless he does these 3 specific things. Domestic violence, right? Another thing that people don't like to think about in terms of true crime. It is absolutely true crime. Domestic violence is one of the most prevalent crimes out there, and to not cover it is not doing anyone a service. And so covering hard issues like that, we had, what was the other one I was just thinking of? Probably the most controversial session I've ever programmed was the guy, Gil Valley, who the New York Post affectionately called the cannibal cop here in New York. He came to New Orleans, and despite a lot of people really not liking the fact that he would be there. Now, if you guys don't know the actual story, HBO did a documentary on this called Thought Crimes, or they didn't do the documentary, but they have the documentary in their catalog. The actual issue that I was interested in has nothing to do with, cannibalism or whatever the New York Post wanted to call it. The actual issue is, when does a crime become a crime, right? And it's very thinky, but it's very important, because in this world of message boards and dark web and like every, people thinking that your microphone is going on your phone and recording conversations, or you having home speakers now where Alexa or Google Home is listening to you for keywords, but things are getting recorded. When does talking about a crime or writing about a crime become a crime? That's a really important topic for the legal system, for police, for all of us to figure out. And in this particular case, we had an actual person who had done a ton of disgusting content related to a crime he fantasized about committing, was arrested for it, was convicted on it, and then that conviction was thrown out by a judge who said you can't convict someone for a thought crime. So the answer is not in yet, but to me, those are the sorts of sessions that I get really excited about. I might be the only one, although that session was packed, where you can actually make a decision about something you want to advocate for and fight for, and then help make actual change in your own community in support of it.
Well, and you had that with Jim Rathman and his take on Tiger King in Austin, which, had audiences flipping the switch on that case.
Yeah, exactly. I thought the biggest example from Austin was Laura Nereider from, most people know her from Making a Murder, but she's a huge Innocence Project and wrongful conviction advocate. She's Brendan Dassey's attorney from Making a Murderer. And her, while people want to hear her talk about Brendan, what I was interested in was that she's at the forefront of trying to create legislation to prohibit, and I might have this wrong, but I think this is right, but to attempt to outlaw police from lying in witness interrogations to elicit confessions, right, which was one of the things in the Brendan Dassey confession, quote unquote. And so she was trying to, and she very eloquently, and if you go on CrimeHQ, you can do, there's trials in there, so you don't have to pay. You can watch this session for free. She very eloquently explained the situation from both sides, explained the challenge for the police, and explained, certainly the issues from the standpoint of if you're being interrogated by police and they're lying to you. But, what she was asking for was, if you're with me, if you believe in this, we need your help. And I think shortly after CrimeCon, whatever state she's in, Illinois, maybe Wisconsin, I'm sorry, I don't have that in front of me, but she lobbied enough where they were the first state in the country to pass that bill to outlaw lying to suspects in interrogations. So these are real tangible things, real changes that are being worked on in the criminal justice system that I feel like our community and everyone related to it has an ability to actually weigh in on and lend their voice to. And that's the best of what we can do aside from helping families. I think that's the second best thing. And that's without judging which side of it you should be on, but be on a side, advocate for something, whatever you believe in. And if we can help educate you on those sides so that you can make a better decision about where you want to support, then I feel like we're doing our job very well. All
right. Besides those three that you just talked about, I'm going to put you on the spot here for a second. Your top 3 speakers or sessions since the inception of CrimeCon to date. Top 3.
Oh, come on. You can't do that to me. I honestly don't. They're all my children. I can't. You can't ask a parent what child they like most.
Okay, then dream get. Okay, who would be your dream get for a CrimeCon event?
In the beginning, I actually would have said Keith Morrison from Dateline. I was a huge Keith Morrison fan before I had ever started this, and now the fact that I've hung out with him and have pictures of him is still mind blowing to me. I really like him. But so dream get people we have not had. I mean, I know the audience's dream get is probably John Douglas. That's someone that we get asked for every year, or my favorite murder hosts, of course, are asked for quite a bit. I wouldn't mind seeing John Douglas, but I don't think he's mine. I'm much more interested. I've been excited about various people who have been in a specific case, that was whatever reason big that year. Generally it's because Netflix did something or whatever. I don't think I have I'm trying to think if there's a name brand person that we haven't had that. I mean, I'd love Judge Judy. She would be incredible, but that's just more fun. I just think her story is amazing. But I don't think I have that name brand person who would be amazing. Just trying to think back. I love novels, and so one of the things I want to do with CrimeCon also is sort of blend that scripted side with the true crime side, the nonfiction side. So someone like Michael Conley, who has written the Bosch books forever and certainly is involved in the Bosch show on Amazon or whatever. I just love his stuff, and I'm super fascinated about how he does sourcing and how he comes up with some of these plots. So people like that, but I don't think anybody else. That's just that's me. I don't know that would be a huge session or not.
Just because your platform is growing and every year it's getting larger with more intention on it and more headliners and bigger cases. So I think truly sky's the limit with what you're doing. It's pretty brilliant.
Well, thank you for that. Yeah, I hope so. And I hope I think to me, it's all about if the guests and attendees and podcasters, who are kind of our 3 groups that come, all find value in it every year, then I think it will continue to grow, and I think if they don't, then people are going to say it wasn't worth the trip and the travel and the ticket price. It's not cheap. We all know that. So, that's my challenge, is just to make sure that every year we've got interesting people, interesting topics, interesting cases, and that I think people are finding the value in it. Wait, I have to go back. Amanda Knox. I want Amanda Knox. That's my number 1 pick. And again, why? Because Kevin is involved in the gray too much. I want to have her explain what has happened since all of this happened, because I know she's been very vocal recently on social media, especially about the new Matt Damon movie. Is it Matt Damon? Yeah, the Stillwater. I think that's Matt Damon. That is loosely inspired by her life, according to the movie, and she's had a lot to say about that. and about other media that has come out. And, the way the media talks about her, like one of her things was they'll say like inspired by, the Amanda Knox case, or it's inspired by the Amanda Knox murder or something. And she's like, why doesn't anyone ever use the victim's name? Why is it always like Amanda Knox from a media perspective? So anyway, tangent, but I would love Amanda Knox to come out. And I think that the audience would really appreciate hearing, what someone like that has to say.
So CrimeCon 2022 is in Las Vegas, April 29th through May 1st. And you also have the Crime Cruise coming up this October 8th. What can we expect to see on the cruise? I
know, but I can't tell. There's a little bit of a secret that I think we're days away from telling everybody, but it's basically going to be a mini CrimeCon at sea, but really focused around a couple key cases and a couple key people who have both been at prior CrimeCons and who are fan favorites. I guess I'd leave it at that. At least one of them is definitely a household name. And I think so his ability to, I think, present on a couple different things, a couple cases, but also a couple topics that we just know fans have asked us for, attendees have asked us for a very long time. So it's going to be, the cruise is only 3 nights. It's sold out. There is a wait list if anyone's interested in getting on it. I'm not sure what kind of space we're going to have available, but it's going to be a cool mix. I think, again, to me, the community is the thing on this. It's a small group of people, relatively speaking, who have decided to go on a cruise sort of in a pandemic because of their love of true crime. That means you really love true crime. And I think, the number one thing is helping these people meet each other to develop relationships. But we're going to surround them with great content, some of it fun, some of it very serious. And then also, of course, you're in Nassau and Coco Cay and all these places. It's going to, knock on wood, kind of be hard to go wrong with that one. And then, we have Las Vegas as our main CrimeCon event, April 29th to May 1st of next year. Definitely, if anyone's listening and you're interested in going and have not gotten a ticket, I would highly recommend it. It does feel like we're on a sellout track with that one, just based on people wanting to get out of their houses and travel again. And the Vegas side of it, I think, has added an additional allure. So we might be tight there. And I would definitely recommend at least putting a deposit down and grabbing one now if you are considering it.
And CrimeHQ, there is a free trial available if everybody wants to go and check that out too.
I definitely think it's worth it. I mean, I might be a little bit biased, but there's a lot there. Every CrimeCon session we've ever done is on demand in CrimeHQ. That alone to me is like hundreds of hours of stuff you could just watch forever, let alone the live events that we do every week, the deep dive stuff on the cases. We have a book club. There's just a lot going on in there, and I definitely would check out a free trial if that's something you might be interested in.
Well, Kevin, thank you so very much and for everything you are doing for the victims and their families.
Thank you guys for having me. This was great. I appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone, for listening. Follow Killer Jeans on Facebook and on Instagram. It's at Killer Jeans, the podcast.
Also, be sure to like and subscribe to Killer Jeans on Podcast One, Apple, or wherever you listen to podcasts.